Nothing remains in the small rooms that were once the magnificent Studiolo and Grotta of Isabella d'Este, Marchioness of Mantua. The several paintings by Correggio and Montaigne, Costa's court portrait, the beautiful wooden intarsas of musical instruments and perspective vistas by the Mola brothers, the furniture, the medallions and dishes, the vast collection of books and musical manuscripts, the decorative panels from the doorway frames and the very tiles of the flooring were all given and sold away together with their impressive collection of antiquities and curiosities gathered over a lifetime. If these rooms were to have remained intact and today seen as they were in the second decade of the 16th century, we may well regard and remember the patron as did her contemporaries, as a prodigy, a prolific linguist, antiquarian, singer, musician, and writer, one of the great benefactors of the arts and letters of the early modern age. As it is, the story is mostly all forgotten, and the art is owned by the Louvre. In the year 1490, at the age of 15, Isabella d'Este moved from the city of Ferrara to the ducal palace of Mantua, having married Francesco II Gonzaga, Marquis of Mantua. A woman of noble birth, she was, in fact, in terms of her rank within the Italian nobility, from a more prestigious family than her husband, arriving with 13 cases of belongings, including her dowry, clothing, jewelry, dishes, which included a silver service. She took her place at the court of Mantua, beginning, according to the diplomat Niccolo de Correggio, her long reign as, quote, the First Lady of the Renaissance. Anxious to make her mark and establish her place at the court within the palace, she began to remodel older rooms within a corner tower of the Castello di San Giorgio, with the hopes of creating a studiolo, a place where she could continue to pursue her interests in art, music, and letters. Isabella d'Este was well educated. Having studied history and the classics, she had the temperament and the skills of a diplomat. Able to read both Latin and Greek, she was a talented singer and a trained musician. Her instrument was the lute, and she loved to sing the soprano in the vocal genre of the fritola. She was in many ways an embodiment of the Renaissance woman, stoic, resilient, with an unyielding spirit pervading a state of calm and unwavering resolve. Her personal motto was, neither in hope nor in fear. The project for the Studiolo was ongoing, taking decades to complete. Indeed, the project was never completed. She continued to collect works from antiquity, to commission contemporary artists, painters, sculptors, musicians, and poets for works until her death at the age of 65 in 1539. A studiolo is a room or suite of rooms in Renaissance palaces. They are often lavishly decorated, used for study, contemplation, and as a place to display a collection of art and objects, antiquities. They were, so to speak, an invention of the Renaissance, most notably in Italy, and are most often associated with the study and revival of classical ideals associated with the culture of ancient Greece and Rome. For Isabella d'Este, the studiolo was used for leisure pursuits, writing, study, and correspondence, as well as for displaying the best things in her collection, at first principally archaeological items. It was also a place of gathering for d'Este's like-minded friends, artists and intellectuals who came to perform, to sing and dance, to debate philosophical ideas, to critique and discuss matters of art, fashion, cuisine, and culture. She began by collecting antiquities, sculptures and fragments of sculptures from Greece and Rome, despite the Pope's ban forbidding the removal of objects from the city of Rome. She also collected items from Egypt as well as Assyrian artifacts, objects from the mausoleum at Halicarnassus in modern-day Turkey. These acquisitions included gems and objects carved into gemstones, including this beautiful Egyptian cameo from the Ptolemaic period, 3rd century BC. Appreciated for their beauty, these artifacts were also the subject of study. Isabella d'Este and her contemporaries were witness to a shift from medieval scholasticism towards humanism, emphasizing human potential and reason and a renewed interest in the classical world. This included art, but also classical manuscripts and literature. The scholars' motto during the period was ad fonte, go to the sources, a methodology with which d'Este was familiar, having been tutored by some of the most notable humanists of the age. She had a keen eye, but somewhat limited financial resources, thus her collecting was gradual, careful, but discerning. The collection of works and their display within the space of the Studiolo, having an intellectual, historical, and aesthetic rigor, was in many ways a form of social exchange. Collectors acquired pieces from other collectors, from estate sales, even by means of a type of black market for looted art. The bust of Empress Faustina the Elder, seen here and dated to the 1st century, was acquired from the painter Montaigne in exchange for settling a debt. Works of art were bequeathed. D'Este was given items from a dying member of the Sforza family in Milan, for example. An inventory made after her death listed more than 1,500 items, mainly coins and metals, but also 72 vessels and 40 engraved gems. She acquired a statue of Cupid believed to have been made by the great ancient Greek Praxiteles. This was placed adjacent to a figure of Cupid by Michelangelo, creating the opportunity for debate and discussion comparing the two. Unfortunately, both of these works are lost. The inventory of d'Este's collection listed a bust of the Roman Emperor Octavian, a Venus given by Cesare Borgia, as well as precious gemstones, antique coins, and medallions. The inventory also included finely formed glass and porcelain, and listed over 200 books. They soon turned to commissioning modern works for the apartments, where they would be displayed in tandem with her antiquities. She almost let pass the figure of Cupid by Michelangelo previously mentioned, thinking at first the work an inferior copy of a Greek original. The first new paintings for the Studiolo were commissioned in 1497 and another in 1499 from Andrea Mantegna. Once delivered and hung on the walls, they complemented her growing collection and established the themes to be emphasized in the artistic program presented in the Studiolo. The ensemble, the bringing together of the old and the new, created opportunities for a type of comparison, a paragone, a mode of debate or discussion, a mode of Renaissance scholarship, a critique judging the relative merits and superiority of one to the other. Mantegna's Parnassus was intended by d'Este to express the ideals of the historical past, the beauty of Greek and Roman sculpture presented in myth but expressed for modernity. Not only were ancient and modern works themselves considered within the context of a paragone, seen together in the Studiolo. The different historical periods and the relative cultures were a matter of debate and comparison. The subject and theme of the painting, suggested by the court poet da Ceresara and borrowed from a 15th century poem, were carefully orchestrated by d'Este, as made evident by letters shared between the patron and the artist. The subject comes from Greek mythology. Parnassus is the realm sacred to Apollo, the god of music, poetry, and the arts, and the home of the muses who inspired creativity. The nudity of the figure of Venus standing next to the god Mars was intended to emulate ancient sculpture, a form reminiscent of the artist Praxiteles, and to be an emblem of beauty and truth. The figures of Venus and Mars standing at the top of an archway in the painting, in front of their nuptial bed, were also to be seen as allegories for d'Este and her husband Francesco. Overall, the work represents a realm of beauty and bliss, brought into being by the music of Apollo's lyre, and manifest in the figures of the 9 muses, wearing antique robes, dancing in harmony within an Arcadian landscape. It is interesting to note that Isabella d'Este was called by her contemporaries the 10th muse. Indeed, the meaning is clear. The painting was conceived as an image of the court of Mantua itself, its contemporary importance within an historical context, bringing together strength and beauty in harmony with nature. Conceptually, Montaigne's work unites the arts of painting, music, and sculpture, and invites a consideration of the idea of ut pictura poesis, revisited from Horace's famous poem. Many of the works in the Studiolo were like this, mythological, allegorical, and didactic. Through the agency of the Studiolo, d'Este would present Mantua as a realm of virtue, courage, and honor, her court a place for the cultivation of the arts, the practice of which establishes harmony in the heavens and on earth. Throughout the iconography of the different works commissioned for the Studiolo, d'Este was both muse and queen, bride and mother, the protectress of the arts, and the matriarch of Mantua. Parnassus hung opposite Mantegna's picture of Minerva expelling the vices. The works thus existed together as a pair, again a type of Paragone, inviting debate regarding not only the purpose and function of art, the creation of virtue which vanquishes vice and wickedness, while also expressing d'Este's role as benefactress of the arts, her place and responsibility as Marquess of Mantua. The creation of the Studiolo, the art collected for display there, the gathering of artists and scholars to discuss and debate, was a manifestation of the humanist wish to broaden the scope of the trivium and quadrivium, to lift humanity from its ignorance, to promote a citizenry able to speak and write with eloquence and clarity, and thus capable of engaging in the civic life of their communities, while persuading others to virtue and prudent action. The painting was a reimagining of a type of morality play common in the art of the medieval period. Here Minerva, the goddess of war, the arts, and wisdom, is shown rescuing Diana, the goddess of nature, while expelling the vices from the garden of virtue, who are portrayed as hideous, distorted, and corrupt forms. Minerva is superintended by the moral figures of justice, temperance, and fortitude, who watch from above. These are didactic works, expressive of humanist ideas and ideals regarding the hopes of the New Age, the efforts of Renaissance historians and scholars to vanquish ignorance and avarice. This is clearly seen in the paired works that hung opposite the doorway to the entrance of the Studiolo, painted by Correggio, the so-called Allegory of Virtues, and a separate painting, the Allegory of Vices, dated to 1528 to 30, were placed in the Studiolo by 1531. In Allegory of Virtue, once again we see Minerva, holding a lance and crowned by the figure of Glory. The seated woman on the left is presented with emblems signifying the 4 cardinal virtues. Although to be read as Minerva, some scholars of the painting treat the central figure as that of d'Este herself, presented as the figure of wisdom. In dramatic contrast, the Allegory of Vice depicts a reclining male nude as a suffering, anguished figure beset by companions, one blowing a flute loudly into his ear. The painting is a marvelous display of borrowings and allusions from the sculptures of antiquity, the poetry of Virgil, and modern painters such as Raphael. It is no coincidence that the music of the flute is featured. The debate regarding the relative merits of music between the flute and that of the lyre, or the lute, the lyra da braccio, d'Este's favorite instrument, had been treated in antiquity and was revived in the Renaissance, featuring the story of the musical contest between Apollo and Marsyas. Viewers of the work as it hung in d'Este's studio were no doubt intrigued by these allusions and pictorial references. Was the figure of Vice modeled after that of the Laocoon, a famous sculptural group unearthed in 1506 and displayed to much fanfare in the Vatican? Or rather was he the figure of Silenus, the companion and tutor of the god of wine and revelry, Bacchus? These types of comparisons and juxtapositions were an important component in the artistic program of the Studiolo, and propelled inspiration for debate and conjecture. A Paragone that critiqued the merits of particular works in relation to others and from other periods in history. To encourage this type of discussion, d'Este purchased several works of sculpture from Branicolzi, called Antico, an artist who specialized in finely detailed small bronzes rendered all'antica. Whether busts of fictional or historical figures, or full-length statues representing mythological gods such as Eros and Meleager. These works were modern translations of ancient statuary, and often included gilded details and silver inlaid eyes, a refinement found in some classical and Hellenistic Greek bronzes. Paragone, as a mode of analysis, whether it be a consideration of ideas, of things, works of art, about the experience of art, about the making of art, the form, materials, and design, the concept, included issues of taste, of course, the appearance of works, the style of their execution. This came to involve a consideration of geography, the region from which works originated, a particular milieu, its history, political institutions, and the traditions of art, even its climate. In discussing the Italian schools of painting during the period, distinct regional characteristics are evident. Works by artists based in the south of Italy, Rome and Republican Florence, were different than works made by artists in North Italy, for royal patrons in Milan, Ferrara, Venice, and Mantua. Looking briefly at Botticelli's Birth of Venus, dated to 1485, one of the artist's plenary works made for a Florentine patron, it little prepares us for Lorenzo Costa's treatment of the same subject and theme. D'Este would have appreciated this contrast. A champion of northern painters, she would have welcomed the debate over whether the value of a painting lay in the idea originating in the artist's mind, the invention, which was explored through drawings made prior to the painting's execution, disegno, or in the more lifelike imitation of nature achieved through color in the process of painting itself. Born in Ferrara, Lorenzo Costa was a painter trained in the ateliers of artists working in Ferrara and Bologna. He practiced in a style associated with the soft-edged naturalism of northern oil painting, combined with the radiant colorism inspired by Gothic and Byzantine art. We are looking at one of Costa's signature works, an altarpiece painted with oil on panel for a church in Bologna. A North Italian noble, d'Este clearly preferred the manners and modes of northern artists. Works featuring softer forms created by means of a more pronounced use of chiaroscuro, a reliance on color over line, one way of creating more detailed effects of volume and texture. These were matters of taste, certainly, but involved issues of philosophical and historical debate about how to best represent, naturalistically, a coherent narrative and the human form. As we know, northern artists were among the first to embrace the painting of secular subjects, specializing in oil portraits and scenes of everyday life. We are looking at Lorenzo Costa's painting entitled The Concert, dated to 1485. As a singer and talented lute player, this is a type of new painting d'Este would surely have admired. Shown in action while singing and playing, the treatment evokes qualities of music not only through the depiction of performance, but also by means of the subtle arrangement of figures and forms, the use of more saturated colors, and of chiaroscuro. We can imagine they are singing a fotola, the genre of vocal performance d'Este loved and frequently performed at the palace for friends and family. The allegory of Isabella d'Este's coronation, Isabella d'Este in the Garden of Love from 1505, scene, was the fourth new painting commissioned by d'Este for the Studio Lo, the first of two from Lorenzo Costa. In keeping with themes associated with the establishment of a realm of order, harmony, and well-being presented first by Montaigne in Parnassus and Minerva expelling the vices from the garden, d'Este has been presented in this complex and richly symbolic work by Costa as an exalted figure existing in a paradisial world attended by the gods and goddesses, surrounded by the figures of music and poetry. Shown within a distinct precinct, the composition is divided into separate vignettes together relating the full scope of the narrative. D'Este is shown in a red robe standing before the kneeling figure of Venus, who holds the god of requited love, one of the ancient Erates. D'Este is glorified by the gods, while figures of musicians play their instruments, which, importantly, are shown to be modern instruments. This realm is superintended by personifications of the virtues, perseverance and innocence or purity, seated in the foreground. Mercury, identified with the battle behind him, stands left in the immediate foreground, protecting the garden. The subject and themes of the work were carefully constructed by d'Este, her court poet, and the painter. The allusions of the allegory are clear. D'Este is crowned protectress of the arts, which bring into being and establish the boundaries of a realm of beauty and bliss, a realm defended by the god Mercury, who viewers would have imagined to be d'Este's husband, Francesco II Gonzaga. A wonderful, unusual painting in many ways for its narrative, compositional, and iconographical complexities, the work is remarkable for the central place given to women, to their responsibility and agency in affecting the conditions for good government. Unlike Florence and Rome, the political structures of northern Italian kingdoms meant the kingdom often came to be guided by the spouse for the ruler. D'Este would act as diplomat for cities of North Italy, and while Francesco was for 3 years held hostage in Venice, she served as regent and defender of Mantua, and is said to have held off invading forces. D'Este and her counterparts in Milan and Venice set the example for the type of personality and character of the aristocratic woman in modern history, an educated humanist able to navigate the worlds of contemporary politics and culture. Educated intellectuals, talented and charming, handsome and warm-hearted, Isabella, her sister Beatrice, and d'Este's friend and sister-in-law Elisabetta Gonzaga became trendsetters for the age, establishing the place of modern women and the virtues of feminine temperament for modernity. It would be difficult to underestimate the influence of the Studio Lo of Isabella d'Este and others like it. These places of and for art and culture gave importance to the development of the arts of painting, music, and poetry. They helped establish the beginning of what became the methods and subjects for the discipline of art history, aesthetic treatises, biographies of artists and their schools, as well as the dissemination of manuals by artists concerning design and the science of perspective. The Studio Lo was the arena which brought together the practice of the identification, collection, and preservation of past works, together with patronage in the commission of modern works. The Studio Lo was at the center of new progressive philosophies, emphasizing human values, dignity, and the capacity for self-realization, based on reason, science, and empathy. Isabella d'Este indeed may have been, as Correggio called her, the prima donna del mundo, her studio low, the paradisial realm of love and virtue, made possible through the agency of art.